Hello and welcome to the Night Sky Reader. I'm here with a story to help you relax, meditate, or gently drift to sleep. Tonight, where the tide measures the rock pools. Settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin. A broad wave slides off the black basalt shelf and leaves behind its temporary record. For a moment, the rocky shoreline is marked with a pale line of foam, a dusting of shell grit, and thin silver threads of water that hurry around small rises in the stone and disappear over the edge below. The wash has only just been here. Now it drains away with a soft, steady pull, and an entire stretch of the intertidal zone begins to show itself. The shelf is dark as ink where it is fully wet, smoky gray where the surface has already started to lose its shine. Tiny fragments of shell lie in a loose arc, pink, white, and tan against the stone. A few bubbles hold in shallow pits, then pop one by one. The last runnels gather in hairline channels that were invisible under the wave. They find the slight tilt of the rock and follow it downward. Nothing here is fixed for long. Each level of the shore is arranged by how often seawater reaches it, how long it remains, how quickly it leaves. For a short part of the evening, the retreating tide makes these boundaries readable. The basalt shelf looks plain from a distance, but close to the surface it is mapped by wet marks, seams, pockets, old cracks, and the minute roots of draining water. Above the fresh shine of the shelf, the highest wet mark shows where the sea stood not long ago. Beyond that line, the stone has been exposed longer. The air is cooler there, carrying salt, the mineral smell of drying spray, and a faint iodine trace that will grow stronger lower down. Dusk settles over the water first, then slowly onto the rock. The upper splash zone dries in patches rather than all at once. A rough shoulder of stone holds dull, chalky areas beside darker, damp seams that run through its grain. Pale lichens spread in thin crusts where only spray and the highest reach of waves can touch them. In the small hollows, a little moisture persists longer, but the broad surfaces are already cooling in the open air. Tiny snails gather where the rock gives them shelter. They tuck into cracks and under slight lips in the basalt, each shell no larger than a fingernail, dark and glossy where it still holds damp. They need little space, only a narrow crease where the heat of the day leaves slowly, and the next wash will eventually find them again. A limpet sits lower on the rock, pressed so closely to its own worn outline that shell and stone seem made for each other. It seals down and waits. Here, timing matters more than motion. The creatures of the highest shore endure more air, more drying, longer pauses between wettings. Their shapes are simple answers to that fact. Shells are low and hard to lift. Openings are small. Bodies hold close to stone. Nothing is wasted on display. The stone itself keeps some memory of daytime warmth, though the air has moved past it. A dry patch is slightly dusty under the hand. A dark seam is cool and slick, but no hand interrupts. The evening passes over the upper rock by degrees, and the difference between wet and dry becomes the first quiet measure of the hour. Below, the shore darkens again. What seems at first another rough band of rock resolves into crowding life as the eye moves down and the shift is abrupt. The way density announces itself. The surface is no longer open basalt, but a fitted layer of mussels. Thousands of shells packed edge to edge, each one ridged, blue-black, and faintly reflective where seawater still clings in the narrow spaces between them. Barnacles are set among them, chalky cones with tight plates closed against the air. They turn the dark band granular, as if the ledge has been dusted with pale stone. Between shells, the smallest seams remain wet. A trickle slides through one of them, flashes once in the last low daylight, and vanishes into a crack too narrow to follow. Mussels hold fast by threads secreted into the stone below, fine anchors hidden under the visible shell. Barnacles cement themselves in place for good. What the ledge receives, surge, weight, spray, and then the long suspension of open air between submersions. The life here has answered by compressing itself, fitting tighter, gripping harder, giving less away. As dusk deepens, changes that would be easy to miss at noon become clear. The sheen on the shells shrinks. A line that was glossy moments ago turns satin, then nearly matte. Tiny beads of water remain under overlapping edges where one shell presses against the next. In those narrow, damp places, the temperature falls more slowly. Moisture lingers in a thin shared network rather than in open pools. At the lower edge of the mussel band, the rock begins to soften into other textures. A few anemones hold in protected hollows, still contracted from recent exposure, looking like wet red-brown buttons or soft green knobs pressed against the stone. Nearby, low algae lie flattened where the water left them, their surfaces dark and almost black until light catches a faint olive or wine-red tint. The ledge no longer reads as separate specimens. It becomes a layered surface, rock under shell, shell under droplets, droplets connected by seams, seams draining toward basins below. Even the sound changes. Higher up, the shore offers only the distant hush of receding water. Here there is also a close ticking and dripping, so small it seems to come from inside the rock itself. A narrow runnel leaves the mussel band and enters a shallow basin. Another finds a crack and disappears under a lip of stone before reappearing farther down. These thin threads carry little water, but they show that the exposed shore is not truly broken into parts. For a while it only looks that way. The drainage keeps drawing separate surfaces toward one another. The tide pools hold the evening more quietly than any other part of the shore. Each basin keeps its own water after the ocean has receded, and the retained water is colder than the rock around it. A pool no wider than a serving platter reflects a strip of fading sky. Another, longer and deeper, holds both shadow and a pale, clean brightness where the first moon has risen above the waterline. The edges of the pools are undercut and smooth from long abrasion, coralline algae pink, the rims in stony blushes. Inside, the floor may be bare stone, or sand, or a dense tuft of weed growing from a crack. In one pool, a thin sheet of green sea lettuce lies against the bottom like folded silk. In another, red algae branch from a shaded sidewall, dark until lifted by a ripple that reveals a translucent garnet glow. Anemones are easier to read here. In the air, they contract to conserve water, but in pools deep enough and cool enough, many are open. Their columns grip the stone, while their tentacles spread in tidy rings, green, amber, or smoky rose, depending on the species and the light. They hold themselves in the still water with a physical steadiness, forms clear in the basin beneath the reflected sky. Small snails graze along the margins where film algae coat the rock. Their movement is nearly invisible unless watched against a fixed speck of sand and returned to later. A tiny shrimp, transparent except for dark bead-like eyes, flicks backward once from shadow into open water and then goes still among the wavering reflections. In a deeper pocket, a small fish turns sideways, showing a sudden silver line, and settles again near the bottom. Evaporation alters these pools. Cooling air alters them. The faintest pulse from a lower channel can enter and pass through as a round ripple, lifting a strand of weed, shifting a grain of sand, nudging a bit of shell into a new place. A pool that appears motionless is only moving slowly, on a scale that asks more patience from the eye. Dusk thins further. The sky in the pools darkens from blue-gray to a deeper blue that nearly matches the open water below. Moonlight begins as a small clean patch on one surface, then lengthens as the basin goes still. The reflected brightness trembles at the slightest disturbance, as if each pool is testing how smooth it can become before the next small ripple arrives. One basin lies close beside another, divided only by a raised shoulder of basalt. A shallow channel joins them when water is high enough. For now the channel is nearly empty, but a damp line marks where connection has recently been. The upper pool holds lighter sand and several open anemones. The lower one is darker, deeper, and fringed with weed. They seem separate, yet they share a rim, a drain, a brief future under the same incoming water. Farther along, a pool shaped like a long oval holds a floating ribbon of kelp no wider than a strap. Its blades are olive brown and slick, the edges slightly ruffled from wear. Small gas bladders sit along one section like dark glass beads, catching a little of the remaining light. When a faint pulse enters the pool through a crack at the far end, the ribbon lifts, turns half over, and lays itself down again against the stone. The still center of the shore is not silent, only slowed. Sand settles in thin fans where a basin shallows. A trapped bubble works free from under weed and rises. Water beads on a pool rim and slips down. Above the basins, the mussel ledge grows darker and less detailed. Below them, the sound of water is fuller now, less trickle than wash. The whole transect begins to feel like one connected surface with temporary pauses in it. Those connections deepen as the eye moves lower, into the crevices. Narrow clefts cut the basalt at angles, some no wider than a finger, some deep enough to hold full shadow even before night. Water remains in them long after the open rock begins to dry. It is cooler there, and the air above smells more strongly of saltweed and iodine. Drips continue from hidden points, each one sounding larger in the enclosed stone. The drainage here has slowed almost to nothing, as if the water in these narrow channels has found a reason to pause. At the lower margin, the weed line lies close to the sea. Brown kelp strands rest over rock knobs and across channels, heavy when stranded, then briefly lifted by the residual pull of a passing swell. A blade pressed flat against basalt suddenly loosens along one edge and flutters in place. Another remains still except for the round, buoyant rise of its bladders. These are the first signs that the water below is no longer only retreating. It is beginning to gather itself for the return. This is the kelp forest edge, where open water and exposed shore exchange places most quickly. The basins here are darker and harder to read because they are deeper and already touched by every slight rise. Blue hour lingers above them only briefly, then moonlight takes over, flattening some colors and sharpening others. Wet stone turns blacker, foam turns brighter. Moving surfaces go silver only where the angle is right. The outward drain pauses so gradually that no single moment announces it. A ribbon of water that had been slipping away slows in its channel. The next wash reaches a little farther into a cleft than the previous one. A kelp blade lifts and does not settle back in quite the same place. In the low rock, separate pools begin to answer the sea below them. Incoming water enters first by the roots that never fully dried. It threads through cracks, rounds the edges of stones, and slips over lips into basins resting in their own retained water. A pool that had a distinct rim now overfills at one end. A second basin receives that overflow and sends part of it onward. The channels that seemed like minor details a little while ago become active again. The change moves upward. Water glosses the lower weed line and releases kelp from the stone. Ribbons that were slack begin to stream. Small bladders rise and knock gently against one another. Crevices deepen in color as their surfaces are renewed. The sound grows more even, less scattered. What had been drips and ticks and small trickles gathers into a soft, rounded wash. Across the tide pools, edges blur. Reflections break, reform and vanish under new ripples. Sand lifts in a faint cloud from a shallow basin and settles farther in. Anemones near the rims are covered more fully now, their tentacles moving with the passing current rather than holding in still water. The shrimp that had been nearly invisible against the bottom is carried a short distance and rights itself against the stone. The incoming tide reaches the mussel band with quiet certainty. Water fills the seams between shells, then draws a continuous shine across them. Barnacles that had been dry for an hour are rinsed again. Narrow gullies flash silver in the moonlight and become miniature streams. The ledge stops looking textured and fitted in the same detailed way. Watched long enough, it becomes a single wet slope under moving water. Above that, the pale foam line on the basalt shelf begins to fail. A first thin wash crosses it and retreats, leaving the shell grit less distinct. The next wave reaches farther. The temporary map of the departing sea, so crisp at the beginning of evening, is smudged, interrupted, and then erased. Nothing forceful is required. A little more water, a little more joining, and the record is gone. What is concealed now is not lost. The channels still lie in the rock. The shells still fit the ledge. The pools remain where the basins have always been. But the shore no longer offers each detail separately. It folds them back into a common surface, and with that return comes a different kind of ease. Night settles completely over the transect. The highest splash zone fades first into suggestion, rough stone with only an occasional dull glint where spray reaches it. The middle ledge is a darker band, then not even a band, only part of the slope. Lower down, the sea continues to rise in shallow moving layers over the rock, smoothing differences without quite hiding the shape beneath. The basalt shelf is underwater now, not deep water, only a thin traveling skin that catches moonlight and lets it run. Where there had been shell grit, there is now a soft clouding of brightness that shifts with each passing ripple. The pits in the rock fill empty and fill again. No bubbles hold long enough to count. Ocean waves arrive with an even interval, not large, not hurried. Each one spreads over the shelf, rounds the edges of the stone, and withdraws only partway before the next follows. The surface shines, dark and silver together. The earlier boundaries between wet and dry have shifted upward beyond easy reading. The shore simplifies. The eye may settle on one feature, a single crack, one pool guessed at beneath the moving layer, but there is nothing to finish knowing. The water has resumed the work of joining. Under the passing sheen, all the details observed through dusk remain in place, living by the same alternation that first revealed them. Moonlight travels in broken bars across the small ripples. It touches a lifted edge of kelp, a slick shoulder of basalt, a low line of wash, then goes on. The tide pools have lost their separate mirrors. The crevices no longer hold distinct darkness, but share the same submerged depth. The mussel band is not a fitted crowd anymore, only a slightly roughened stretch under the water's skin. The calm of the rocky shoreline comes from this repeated exchange. Exposure, then submersion, drainage, then return. Nothing here depends on staying still forever. The upper rock dries and waits. The basins hold. The lower weed line yields first. Then the ocean draws over everything once more, and the whole intertidal zone rests under one continuous motion. By full night, the transect that could be read in stages has softened into one dark, shining plain. The pale map of foam is gone. The shell grit is hidden. The narrow channels work under the surface rather than across it. What remains to the eye is simpler than what came before, but not emptier. It is the same place, gathered back together. Another wave crosses the shelf. It leaves no line this time, only a moving gloss that thins, trembles, and is followed by the next. Under moonlight, the black rock and the shallow water trade the same quiet brightness, and the shoreline that was briefly known in pieces returns, without hurry, to the sea. Thank you for spending this time with the Night Sky Reader. May your night be peaceful. Until next time, rest well.